10 golden age stars who were banned from talk shows forever. In an era when television talk shows became cultural rituals, hosts and producers carefully curated who would be invited into millions of homes. These stages were meant to showcase wit, warmth, and conversation, but they often became battlegrounds where egos clashed, tempers erupted, and reputations collapsed in real time. What happens when a star known for grace reveals cruelty behind the curtain? When the quick charm of a leading man gives way to contempt? Or when the very people who embodied Hollywood's golden allure became too dangerous, too unpredictable, or too offensive to risk before a live audience? Bans were not declared lightly. Each one told a story of betrayal, defiance, or scandal that could not be swept away by charm or publicists. Some were punished for arrogance, others for politics, and still others for behavior so disruptive that silence became the only solution. These bans reveal not just who fell from grace, but also the fragile balance of power in Hollywood's golden age. To understand that balance, we begin with the story of a comic genius whose fire burned too hot for the small screen. Jerry Lewis, the comic genius who burned too bright. Brilliant, volatile, and impossible to contain, Jerry Lewis embodied both the genius and the chaos of Hollywood comedy. On talk shows, his sharp tongue and restless energy often turned from performance to provocation. Guests laughed nervously while hosts struggled to steady the mood. Lewis once remarked that television was a playground for amateurs, a dig that did not sit well with networks. When the improvisation spiraled into tirades against producers or co-guests, invitations soon dried up. The very qualities that made Lewis a legend in film, the manic energy, the refusal to conform, the bursts of unpredictable brilliance, translated poorly to the structured environment of live television. He often derailed interviews by hijacking questions, twisting them into long monologues that veered from self-congratulation to biting critique. "Television is too small for me." That declaration, made during a tense exchange with a host, captured the rift. Lewis viewed himself as too grand for the medium, while producers saw him as too combustible to manage. Stories from insiders described him walking onto sets unannounced, demanding changes, or even mocking camera operators mid-broadcast. The same passion that created classics like The Nutty Professor made him incapable of restraint when confronted with talk show banter. Eventually, the bans came not as punishment but as survival. Networks could not risk their fragile balance collapsing under his force. Lewis's absence from the circuit left a mark, a reminder that brilliance without boundaries can dazzle on screen but shatter on stage. He was the rare guest whose talent was undeniable, but whose presence became a liability too heavy to carry. Zsa Gabor, the glittering guest who cut too deep.
You could have pled guilty and the thing...
Why shall I say guilty when I'm not guilty?
She dazzled with glamour, wit, and an accent that seemed tailor-made for talk shows. But Zsa Gabor's presence often came with sharp barbs aimed at hosts and fellow guests alike. Beneath the diamonds and charm was a temper that occasionally erupted into insults, and her infamous clashes off-camera, most famously with law enforcement, made her a lightning rod for controversy. For producers wary of unpredictability, her name eventually carried more risk than reward. Gabor understood the art of spectacle better than most. Draped in jewels and delivering lines with theatrical timing, she gave viewers a performance every time she sat on a talk show couch. But that performance often came with a sting. When a host's question struck her as beneath her dignity, she would dismiss it with an icy retort. One producer recalled, "She didn't answer questions, she judged them." That habit turned lighthearted conversation into something closer to a duel. Her off-camera scandals only amplified the problem. The infamous arrest in which she slapped a police officer became a defining headline. And though she leaned into the notoriety with quips and bravado, talk show producers recognized the risks. They wanted wit, not open defiance of authority replayed live before millions. Still, Gabor's bans revealed something larger: the fragility of celebrity when charm crosses into cruelty. Her glittering presence could light up a set, but her sharp tongue could just as quickly burn it down. For talk shows built on control, she represented danger dressed in diamonds, and eventually that danger proved too great to book. Oliver Reed, the wild man who couldn't be tamed.
But I can't believe you have a tattoo in a very unusual place.
Yes, on my cock.
Few actors could drink, fight, and charm with such equal intensity. Oliver Reed's talk show appearances became notorious for slurred rants and sudden confrontations. One infamous night saw him challenging fellow guests to arm wrestle live on air. While audiences were fascinated by his raw unpredictability, producers knew chaos was inevitable. His ban was less about a single outburst and more about a reputation for volatility that talk show stages could no longer absorb. Reed's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Known for marathon drinking sessions and a booming personality, he brought that same unruly energy onto television. Instead of rehearsed anecdotes or gentle self-promotion, he often turned interviews into arenas of dominance. Hosts found themselves disarmed when Reed leaned too close, barked out unexpected challenges, or cut across fellow guests mid-sentence. One critic described his appearances as a high-wire act where the wire was always fraying. In Britain, his clashes on live television became the stuff of tabloid legend. But American producers quickly realized that unpredictability did not always translate to entertainment. A single misstep on live broadcast could derail not just the show, but also its reputation. Reed's charisma was undeniable. When he was sober, his storytelling was magnetic. But the risk of chaos grew too heavy to ignore. His bans illustrated a broader truth about talk shows. The medium thrived on spontaneity, but only within boundaries. Oliver Reed embodied what happened when those boundaries collapsed. To his admirers, he was thrillingly real. To producers, he was an unpredictable storm best kept off the stage. Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen with ice in her veins.
I'm not the giant or the tycoon. I'm merely a member of the board of directors of Pepsi-Cola. Can I mention it?
Hollywood royalty carried an iron will, and Joan Crawford's demand for control extended well beyond film sets. On talk shows, her insistence on scripting conversations and refusing unplanned questions created tension. When hosts pushed back, Crawford bristled, once storming off mid-interview when challenged about her career choices. Her brilliance as a performer was never in doubt, but her refusal to surrender control in a medium built on spontaneity ensured her silence on future lineups. Crawford had built her career on discipline, reinvention, and ruthless precision. On film sets, every gesture and glance was calculated. That same need for control followed her into television, but the format thrived on improvisation and candor. Producers expected anecdotes and banter. Crawford expected reverence. When a host once veered into questions about her rumored rivalries, she cut him off sharply, declaring, "I will not dignify gossip with an answer." The audience gasped, sensing the chill in the room. For Crawford, such defiance was self-protection. For talk show bookers, it was combustible. They wanted guests who could laugh at themselves, who could play into the illusion of intimacy with the viewer. Crawford, with her regal bearing and razor-edged pride, refused to play that game. Her bans were not about scandal, but about incompatibility. Crawford's mastery belonged to the carefully lit world of cinema, not the unpredictable give and take of a talk show set. She remained untouchable, yet untouchable guests made for poor television. In her absence, producers found relief, but audiences lost the chance to see a legend unguarded. Richard Harris, the rebel who turned interviews into battles.
The only good thing about this, the only good thing was it was over a woman, and I guess that's worth it.
Charismatic and unpredictable, Richard Harris often blurred the line between raconteur and rebel. His talk show appearances could begin with poetic storytelling and end with blunt confessions that rattled censors. At times, his drinking spilled onto the set, fueling rambling monologues and clashes with hosts. Harris later admitted, "I wasn't there to sell myself. I was there to cause trouble." Trouble might have entertained viewers, but for producers, it was an invitation to permanent exclusion. Harris's career was marked by contradictions. He could be magnetic, recounting tales of Shakespeare, rugby, or life on set with a warmth that captivated audiences. But just as easily, the mood could sour. Hosts sometimes found themselves in verbal duels when Harris bristled at questions about his personal life or politics. "I don't care if it offends. I care if it's true." That unfiltered honesty thrilled viewers, but pushed networks into panic. One particularly notorious appearance saw Harris delivering a meandering defense of his hard-living reputation, before pivoting to call out the hypocrisy of the industry live on air. The segment ended abruptly, not with applause, but with a cut to commercial. For producers, the risk became clear. Harris could turn a polished broadcast into an unpredictable battle at any moment. His bans highlighted the fine line between authenticity and disruption. Harris refused to polish his edges for television stage, and that refusal made him unforgettable, but also unbookable. In the end, his rebellion lived on less in talk show archives than in the whispered warnings of producers who chose safer guests. Bette Davis, the truth-teller who cut Hollywood open,
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
and sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, Bette Davis never shied away from speaking her truth. On talk shows, that truth often came at the expense of her peers and even her hosts. Davis could turn a casual question into a public takedown, exposing rivalries Hollywood preferred to keep hidden. While her candor made for riveting television, it also made producers nervous. Davis embodied the danger of a star too honest for an industry built on illusion. Davis's reputation for bluntness was well-earned. She could sit regally on the set, cigarette in hand, and dismantle an entire career with a single remark. When asked about working with certain co-stars, she sometimes responded with thinly veiled barbs. Why not tell the truth? It saves everyone time. That honesty, delivered with her signature precision, electrified audiences but left networks uneasy. Her feuds with Hollywood rivals became part of her legend, and she was never above referencing them in front of a live audience. On one occasion, she openly mocked the way a fellow actress prepared for scenes, drawing both laughter and shock. What made Davis formidable on screen made her combustible in unscripted settings. She did not differentiate between a film set and a talk show couch when it came to asserting her authority. For producers, the risk was simple. Davis spoke too freely. Talk shows were designed to maintain a glossy veneer of civility, and Davis's willingness to strip it away was incompatible. Her bans were not about failure, but about fear. Fear that her truth-telling would tear Hollywood's carefully woven fabric in full view of millions. Robert Mitchum, the tough guy who refused to play along.
I think if one more person had told me how many times you've terrified interviewers, I wouldn't have been able to do this.
He cultivated an image of quiet toughness, but Robert Mitchum's disdain for pretense cut through with biting force in unscripted moments. On air, he often responded to questions with dismissive one-liners or outright refusals to engage. One host recalled, "Mitchum didn't play the game, he stared it down." That refusal to bend to the talk show format made him unpredictable and, ultimately, unwelcome. His legend endured, but his talk show chair remained empty. Mitchum's persona was forged in roles that demanded understatement, stoic men of action who revealed little. On talk shows, he carried that same persona with him, but instead of charm, it came across as resistance. Hosts eager for lively anecdotes found themselves confronted with monosyllables or long silences. "I'm not here to entertain, I do that on screen." That remark, delivered flatly during a live appearance, captured his philosophy perfectly. Stories circulated of producers dreading his presence. He would sometimes arrive late, give no preparation to pre-interview questions, and dismiss attempts at lighthearted banter. What played as magnetic mystery on the big screen translated into dead air on television. In a format built on rhythm and connection, Mitchum's refusal to perform was lethal. His bans were less about scandal than about style. Talk shows required guests who could be pliable, playful, and endlessly engaging. Mitchum's unwillingness to play along revealed his true loyalty, not to the machinery of celebrity, but to the integrity of detachment. That stance preserved his mystique, but it made him an exile from television's most intimate stage. Shelley Winters, the firebrand who turned interviews into duels,
My mother said, "But do you expect me to live in it with a baby?" No, okay, I got it so long.
Shelley Winters was fiery, outspoken, and entirely unwilling to hold her tongue. She once famously dumped a glass of water on a fellow guest mid-show, declaring, "That's for talking nonsense." Producers admired her talent but feared her temper. Winters embodied the tension between raw honesty and reckless spontaneity, a quality that delighted audiences yet exhausted hosts. Eventually, the bans came quietly but firmly. Winters came to talk shows with the same raw energy she brought to her roles: unpredictable, uncompromising, and unforgettable. If she felt a fellow guest was spouting insincerity or trying to dominate the conversation, she struck back without hesitation. That edge made for riveting television, but it also turned interviews into battlegrounds. Viewers at home were entertained. Producers were left cleaning up the aftermath. She also had a habit of veering into personal stories that left others squirming. Winters spoke openly about her marriages, her affairs, and her critiques of Hollywood's elite. "I say what everyone else is thinking." That level of candor, while refreshing, frequently crossed the line networks drew between entertainment and scandal. For Winters, talk shows weren't polite exchanges. They were arenas where truth and performance collided. But for producers, every booking became a gamble. Would she deliver a moment of brilliance or ignite a scene that spiraled out of control? Eventually, the balance tipped. Shelley Winters remained respected on stage and screen, but her talk show chair was quietly removed, a reminder that some flames burn too hot for television. Marlon Brando, the genius who mocked the circus.
I think to talk about movies and stuff like that is such a misuse of time.
Marlon Brando's genius reshaped acting, but his disdain for publicity was equally legendary. On talk shows, he often mocked the format itself, refusing to play along with the banter and skewering the very idea of celebrity promotion. At one point, he lashed out at questions he deemed shallow, calling the medium a circus for clowns. Even Brando's brilliance couldn't outweigh the hostility he brought to the stage. Brando believed that interviews cheapened the craft of acting. When pressed to share anecdotes or promote his films, he often shifted the conversation toward critiques of Hollywood's power structures, leaving hosts scrambling. His silences could stretch uncomfortably long, as if daring the interviewer to fill the void. What some saw as arrogance was, in his mind, resistance against the machinery of celebrity. One notorious appearance ended with Brando chastising the audience for laughing at a joke he considered shallow. Instead of playing the crowd, he stared them down, creating an air of unease rarely seen in a format built for entertainment. "Fame is the mask that eats the face." Such remarks revealed his contempt for the very system that made him famous. For producers, booking Brando became a liability. He was unpredictable, confrontational, and unwilling to abide by television's unwritten rules of warmth and charm. His absence from future talk show schedules was inevitable. Brando had no interest in being a guest, only in being a provocateur. That made him unforgettable, but also untouchable in the world of television conversation. Frank Sinatra, the charming bully who silenced the room.
"You don't need to work blue. You'll never play the big rooms with that crap. Ask Red Fox."
The voice of a generation, yet a guest few hosts wanted twice. Frank Sinatra carried with him not only star power, but also an entourage and an air of menace. When questions turned personal, his charm could evaporate into icy stares or cutting remarks. Rumors of grudges against certain hosts only deepened the tension. Sinatra's absences weren't about scheduling. They were calculated decisions by producers who knew one wrong word could bring the show crashing down. Sinatra commanded respect wherever he went, but on the delicate stage of a talk show, that presence could become suffocating. Hosts eager for levity often found themselves navigating unspoken rules. Don't pry into his private life. Don't mention the underworld connections whispered in gossip columns. Don't mispronounce a name from his inner circle. Crossing any of those invisible lines could bring a biting response. "You don't kid around with me, pal." Behind the scenes, producers whispered about the tension that followed Sinatra. The entourage in the wings, the weight of his reputation, and the fear of retaliation made every appearance a high-stakes gamble. What was meant to be casual entertainment risked becoming an exercise in intimidation. In the end, Sinatra's bans reflected not weakness but power. He was simply too big, too untouchable, and too dangerous for a medium built on playfulness. His absence was a decision born of survival, For while audiences adored his music, talk show stages could not withstand his shadow. In the golden glow of Hollywood's past, talk shows were more than entertainment. They were arenas where charm and control were tested in front of millions. For those who thrived, the couch became a throne. For those who clashed with its demands, it became a trapdoor. The bands we've explored remind us that fame is not invincibility. Even the brightest stars could be silenced when their fire burned against the grain of the medium. These stories revealed a truth larger than scandal. That legacy is shaped as much by absence as by presence. So, what do you think? Were these bands acts of justice or moments of fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed this journey into Hollywood's hidden history, subscribe for more stories that pull back the curtain on the stars we thought we knew.